When Clint Eastwood walked onto the set of The Vanessa Johnson Show, the audience expected to see just another Hollywood legend struggling to defend himself. They had no idea they were about to witness a masterclass in composure, strength, and the kind of old-school grit that never goes out of style. Vanessa thought she had him cornered, armed with clever sound bites and media traps designed to dismantle an icon. But Clint didn't flinch, he didn't rage, he didn't even blink. And what happened next wasn't just an interview, it became the most unforgettable lesson in dominance and respect live television had ever seen. It was a studio buzzing with anticipation. The lights were bright, hot, the kind that made even the most confident guests sweat. But Clint Eastwood wasn't sweating. He sat in the green room, unmoved by the chaos outside. Producers whispered into headsets, stagehands rushed to make last-minute adjustments, and the audience filled the seats, eager for what they had been promised. A hard-hitting, no-holds-barred interview. At the center of it all was Vanessa Johnson, polished, poised, and ready for a fight. She had built her reputation on exposing hypocrisy, on forcing her guests into moments they couldn't escape. Politicians, activists, Hollywood icons, none had left her show unscathed. Tonight her target was Clint Eastwood. The promo had been running for days. An American icon under the spotlight, the teasers boasted. Clips of Clint's old westerns played in slow motion, juxtaposed with Vanessa's smooth, practiced voice. Has Hollywood moved on from Clint Eastwood? Is his version of masculinity outdated? What's he really like behind closed doors? The media ate it up. Twitter, cable news, entertainment blogs. Everyone speculated how Vanessa would dismantle the aging cowboy. Would she trap him with his own words? Would he get flustered? Would he storm off like so many had before him? What no one asked was the most important question of all. What if Clint Eastwood didn't fall for the trap? The crowd roared as Vanessa took the stage. She radiated confidence, a knowing smirk on her lips. This was her arena, and Clint, he was just the latest guest to be served up on a silver platter. Backstage, a producer gave Clint the cue. He stood, rolled his shoulders back, and adjusted his jacket. Then, without a word, he walked toward the set. The game had begun. But Vanessa had no idea she was playing against a man who never lost. Vanessa leaned forward in her chair, legs crossed, hands neatly folded in her lap. She was in control, or at least she thought she was. "Clint," she said, her voice smooth, measured, almost playful. "You've been in Hollywood a long time. Decades, really." She smiled, tilting her head slightly. "Tell me, do you ever feel like you've outlived your own era?" The audience chuckled, not loudly, but enough to send a message. Clint didn't blink. He simply rested an elbow on the armrest, his fingers lightly tapping against the chair. The silence stretched, just long enough for Vanessa to shift in her seat. "I mean," she continued, filling the void, "you built your career on a certain, let's call it, a traditional brand of masculinity, the strong, silent type, the lone gunslinger, the tough-as-nails war hero." She smiled again, but this time it felt too rehearsed. But Hollywood has evolved, hasn't it? We've moved past the days when men solved problems with a gun and a glare. Don't you think it's time for a new kind of hero? Another chuckle from the crowd. Someone in the front row smirked. The tension was subtle, simmering, the kind that made people lean in, expecting something big. Clint finally moved. He shifted slightly in his seat, cracking his knuckles, letting the sound cut through the air. Then he looked at Vanessa, not with anger, not with frustration, but with the kind of slow, deliberate gaze that made men rethink their life choices. "A new kind of hero," he repeated, voice low, gravelly. He nodded, as if rolling the thought over in his mind. "You mean the kind that tweets about their feelings instead of handling their business?" The audience let out a few gasps. A few people clapped, just a handful, but enough for Vanessa's eyes to flicker toward the noise. "Well," she said, recovering quickly, "I think we're at a point where strength can mean more than just brute force. We don't need to see men fighting their way through problems anymore, don't you agree?" Clint exhaled slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever been in a real fight, Vanessa?" She blinked. "Excuse me." "A real fight," Clint said again. "Not an argument, not a debate. I mean a fight where someone's actually trying to hurt you." Silence. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She wasn't expecting this. Clint nodded, leaning back again. "See, that's the thing about fights. You don't get to redefine strength when the other guy's throwing punches." The audience erupted, a mix of laughter and gasps. Even some of Vanessa's own staff smirked behind the cameras. For the first time all night, Vanessa Johnson looked unsure of herself. And Clint? He was just getting started. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her smile widening. Not the friendly kind, but the kind a lion gives before the kill. She had let Clint dance around her first few questions, had let him think he had control. But now, it was time to strike. She glanced at her cue cards, even though she already knew exactly what she was about to do. "You know, Clint," she began, voice buttery smooth, "we've talked a lot about masculinity tonight, your films, your views, your place in Hollywood, but I think there's one more thing we need to discuss." She let the moment breathe, just enough to build anticipation. "Your wife." The audience reacted instantly, some leaning forward, some murmuring. A few phones went up, recording. They knew what was coming. They had seen Vanessa do this before. Clint didn't flinch. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her voice laced with something that sounded like curiosity, but dripped with condescension. "She's a lot younger than you, isn't she?" Vanessa's smile was just a little too wide. "Some people might call that a bit of a power imbalance." A ripple of uneasy laughter ran through the crowd. Clint still didn't move. Vanessa pressed on. "I mean, let's be honest. A man like you, Hollywood legend, wealthy, powerful, you really think she married you for love?" Laughter, applause, gasps. Vanessa leaned back, enjoying the reaction. She had him. She had finally found the weak spot. "It's an old story," she continued, gesturing vaguely. "An older man, a younger woman, the charm of status, the security of wealth." She shrugged, eyes gleaming. "I guess we all just wonder, when the cameras are off, when the spotlight fades, does she stay because she loves you, or does she stay because, well, she traded up?" The audience lost it. Scattered claps, some hoots, a few outright laughs. This was exactly what they came for, Vanessa taking a Hollywood tough guy and turning him into a joke. Finally, Clint moved. Not much, just a slight tilt of the head, the faintest narrowing of his eyes. He didn't frown. He didn't scowl. He didn't react, not the way Vanessa expected. He just stared at her, a cold, heavy, unshaken stare. And suddenly, the room felt different. Vanessa's smirk faltered. The audience, sensing the shift, quieted. They had come for a takedown. What they didn't realize was that they were about to witness a reckoning. The studio felt like it had shrunk. The air got thicker, the cameras a little too close. Vanessa didn't realize how loud the silence could be until now. Clint Eastwood just sat there, unmoving. His fingers tapped once on the armrest. One single tap. Then nothing. No words, no reaction. Just waiting. The audience, once lively and laughing, now shifted uncomfortably. Even the crew behind the cameras could feel it. Vanessa swallowed. She had expected an outburst, a flustered defense, maybe even a joke to deflect the question. What she didn't expect was this, the kind of silence that turned the tables without a single word, the kind of silence that made people second-guess their own actions, the kind of silence that made Vanessa suddenly realize she had screwed up. Clint exhaled slowly, barely audible over the hush that had fallen across the set. Then, in a voice so low, so steady, it might as well have been a loaded gun, he finally spoke. "You done?" The words sliced through the tension like a blade. Scattered laughter from the crowd, nervous, uncertain. Vanessa let out a forced chuckle, trying to act unbothered. "Oh, come on, Clint, you can't blame me for asking." Clint raised a single finger, not aggressive, not angry, just enough to make her stop talking. And then he spoke again. "You done?" This time, nobody laughed. The silence stretched again. Vanessa shifted, suddenly feeling like the lights were too hot. Clint sat forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice dropping even lower. "You think you know my wife?" he asked. His tone was calm, not defensive, not rattled, just steady. Vanessa blinked. I didn't say." Clint nodded. "No, you just sat there and mocked her. In front of an audience. In front of cameras. You think that makes you smart?" Vanessa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Clint's voice stayed even, but somehow the weight of his words grew heavier. "You talk about power imbalance." He shook his head slowly. "But I'll tell you what real power is. It's sitting across from someone who thinks they can humiliate your wife in front of the world, and watching them realize they just made the biggest mistake of the night." The audience gasped. A few people clapped, some even cheered. Vanessa tried to laugh it off, but it didn't land. "Clint?" He just leaned back in his chair, totally at ease. And in that moment, everyone watching knew. Vanessa had just lost control of her own show, and Clint Eastwood, he was just getting started. Clint leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The weight in the room had shifted. The control Vanessa thought she had, gone. His voice was low, steady, dangerous in its calmness. "You don't know my wife. You don't know our life. But you sure seem comfortable judging it." The audience froze, their murmurs dying in their throats. Vanessa's smirk flickered, just for a second. Clint didn't stop. He wasn't done, not even close. "You know, I always hear Hollywood talking about empowerment, about how women should make their own choices, how they should be respected, but that only seems to count when you agree with their choices." Vanessa's lips parted, but she didn't speak. She could feel it. The interview was slipping through her fingers. Clint tilted his head, his voice slow and deliberate, each word hitting like a hammer. "If my wife was the older one, would we be having this conversation?" Boom. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, applause, a few cheers from the back. Even some of Vanessa's own crew members exchanged knowing looks behind the cameras. Vanessa stiffened, her hand gripping the armrest just a little tighter. I wasn't saying," she started, but Clint wasn't letting up. "No, you were saying plenty." His stare locked onto her, unshaken, unbothered. "See, I've been around long enough to know how this works. You don't like what a man stands for? Fine. You come after him. But dragging his wife into it? That ain't journalism. That's just desperate." More claps, more murmurs. Vanessa forced a laugh, but it was tight, strained. She wasn't in control anymore. Clint sat back, his expression unreadable. But the message was clear. He had just flipped the script. Vanessa took a slow breath, masking the fact that she could feel the studio audience slipping away from her. She had spent years perfecting this format, pushing guests into corners, leading them into traps they couldn't escape. But Clint wasn't playing by the rules. Time to pivot. She smoothed her jacket, flashed a knowing smile, and let out a practiced chuckle. "Well, Clint, I can see you're very passionate about this." She adjusted her posture, the sharpness returning to her voice. "But let's take a step back. The real issue here isn't just about relationships. It's about the kind of men we celebrate." Clint said nothing. He just waited, watching. Vanessa leaned in, her confidence creeping back. This was her moment to reframe the discussion. "You've spent your whole career playing a certain type of man, the grizzled cowboy, the brooding vigilante, the strong, silent guy who solves problems with his fists." A few in the audience nodded, sensing her comeback. "But Hollywood's changing, Clint." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, her words turning sharper. "We don't need macho men like that anymore. We've moved past all that toxic, outdated masculinity." A beat of silence. Then she delivered the line she had been waiting to drop. "Or do you think we should all go back to the Wild West?" The audience laughed, some clapping, some nodding. A small victory. Vanessa was regaining control. Clint smirked. Not a nervous smirk, not an uncomfortable one. A smirk that said, "You just made a mistake." His fingers drummed against the armrest. He exhaled slowly, as if he had seen this exact moment play out 100 times before. "Let me ask you something," Clint said, voice casual, almost amused. "You ever notice it's always the people who never had to be tough that like to complain about toughness?" The audience reacted immediately. A few cheers, some surprised laughs. Vanessa's expression tightened. "That's not what I—" Clint raised a finger, just enough to stop her cold. "You sit here in this nice studio with your producers and your team, and you tell the world toughness is outdated, that masculinity is some kind of problem." His smirk faded. His voice turned sharp again. "But you know who doesn't think that? The guy working 2 jobs to put food on the table, the firefighter running into a burning building, the soldier standing guard so the rest of us can sleep peacefully at night." The crowd erupted. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but for the first time, it wasn't her turn anymore. Clint had the room, and he wasn't letting it go. Clint leaned back, tapping his fingers against the chair's armrest. The weight in the room had shifted again. He wasn't just speaking to Vanessa anymore. He was speaking to everyone watching. "You can mock toughness all you want," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "but it's the only thing keeping this world together." The audience fell silent. No nervous laughter this time, no clever retorts from Vanessa, just the cold, undeniable weight of truth settling over the room. Clint let the words sink in, then continued. "Strength isn't just about men. It's about anyone who stands their ground when life gets tough." His eyes locked on Vanessa, but his message was bigger than her. "You think the world runs on feelings? You think the people keeping everything together get the luxury of sitting around and debating whether strength is outdated?" He shook his head. "You ever met a firefighter, a cop, a mother raising 3 kids on her own? You think toughness is the problem, or do you think it's the only reason they survive?" A slow clap started somewhere in the back of the audience. Clint didn't acknowledge it. He wasn't performing. He was just telling the truth. "But you know what really causes problems?" Clint's voice dipped lower. "Weak men. Men who fold when things get hard. Men who make excuses instead of standing up. Men who let their families fall apart because it's easier to blame someone else than to be strong for the people who need them." More claps. Louder this time. Vanessa shifted in her seat. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The audience was supposed to be on her side. They were supposed to laugh at Clint, not nod along with him. Yet here they were, clapping, agreeing. Clint saw it. And for the first time, Vanessa did too. The shift was undeniable. People weren't laughing at Clint anymore. They were listening. Vanessa could feel it happening. The energy in the studio was slipping from her grasp. The audience wasn't smirking at Clint's old-school views anymore. They were nodding. Even some of her own crew members, the ones behind the cameras, were barely hiding their smirks. She needed to cut this off before it got worse. Vanessa held up a hand, forcing a tight smile. "Well, Clint, I think—" Clint didn't even look at her. He just turned slightly in his chair, gave her one slow glance, and she froze. The kind of look that doesn't need words, the kind that says, "Sit down, let the grown-ups talk." The audience burst into applause. Vanessa felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was turning into a public reckoning. Clint leaned forward again, speaking over the applause like it wasn't even there. "You sit here in your nice studio with your producers and your scripted lines, and you tell the world toughness is outdated." He tilted his head. "You ever wonder why people aren't laughing with you anymore?" Vanessa swallowed hard. She could feel the heat of the stage lights now. She forced another laugh, but it was hollow, brittle. "Oh, come on, Clint, you're acting like—" Clint raised a hand, just slightly, just enough to make her stop. Not aggressive, not loud, just a small, simple gesture that told everyone in the room exactly what they needed to know. Vanessa wasn't in control anymore. Clint was. The audience roared. Some were on their feet now, clapping. The cheers weren't ironic. They weren't mocking. They were real. Vanessa had spent her whole career tearing people apart. Now, for the first time, she was on the receiving end, and she had no idea how to handle it. Clint leaned back, relaxed, unbothered. "Like I said," he murmured, just loud enough for the cameras to catch it. "Weak men create chaos." Another explosion of applause. Vanessa Johnson had invited Clint Eastwood onto her show to take him down. Instead, she was the one falling apart, and the world was watching. The studio was electric, the kind of energy that didn't just stay in the room. It was the kind that would spread like wildfire the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Vanessa felt it. She had spent years controlling the conversation, guiding interviews like a conductor, leading an orchestra. But tonight, she wasn't leading anything. Clint Eastwood had taken the wheel, and she was barely holding on. She forced a laugh, desperate to regain her footing. "Well, Clint, I think we can agree." He wasn't done. Clint leaned forward, just slightly, his gaze locked onto hers. And then, in a voice so calm, so deliberate, that it felt like a loaded gun going off in slow motion, he delivered the final blow. "You want to talk about my wife? At least she's strong enough to stand beside me, not hide behind a TV desk, taking cheap shots at people she doesn't understand." Boom. The room erupted. Cheers, whistles, people on their feet clapping. The sound was deafening. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly, then shut. For the first time in her career, she had no words. She forced a chuckle, but everyone could see it. The cracks, the unraveling. She shifted in her seat, gripping her cue cards like a lifeline, but they weren't saving her tonight. Clint didn't move. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just watched as Vanessa realized. She had just been completely and utterly dismantled, and the cameras caught every second of it. The clip hit the internet before Clint even left the building. First, it was a few posts, then a flood. Within minutes, it was trending. Clint Eastwood humiliates talk show host on live TV. Vanessa Johnson's worst career moment. A masterclass in shutting down media hypocrisy. It was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, news sites, reaction videos, memes, remixes. Someone slowed down Clint's one-liner, adding dramatic music. Another edited Vanessa's face into a game over screen. The internet was ruthless. Vanessa's network panicked. Crisis teams were assembled. PR statements were drafted. Damage control mode activated. The show's official account tried to spin it. "We welcome all perspectives on our platform." Last night's debate was a passionate discussion between two strong personalities. Nobody bought it. The comments? Brutal. "Just admit you got wrecked and move on." Vanessa thought she was going to cancel Clint. Instead, she canceled herself. They should rename the show The Clint Eastwood Experience after that beatdown. Vanessa's colleagues went silent. Even those who agreed with her politics didn't defend her. No one wanted to be on the losing side of this one. Meanwhile, Clint? He walked out of the studio like nothing had happened. No press statements, no tweets, just a man who had said his piece and moved on, and that made it even worse for Vanessa. The clip didn't fade after a day. It kept going. For weeks, it dominated news cycles. Podcasts debated it. Late-night hosts joked about it. Academics even wrote essays analyzing what went wrong for Vanessa. And Clint? His reputation only grew stronger. People revisited his old interviews, his speeches, his films. Rocky Balboa's famous monologue resurfaced. "It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." People saw the connection. This wasn't just a viral moment, it was a cultural reset. Vanessa? She disappeared for a while. No new interviews, no talk show appearances, and when she finally did come back, she was different. Careful, measured. Because she had learned something the hard way. You don't mock real strength, and you sure as hell don't go after Clint Eastwood unless you're ready for the consequences. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more insane.